but early word, not confirmed by Israeli authorities, of more explosions over Tel Aviv. And if this has happened, make no mistake, this is a very serious escalation, which history tells us will have significant consequences. This is far from over. Updates the moment we get them.
On our broadcast tonight, On the Brink, Israelis and Palestinians running for cover, the heaviest fighting there in years as bomb shelters open and Israel calls up 40,000 reserves. We're covering a breaking news situation as the skies over Israel have lit up tonight. Sirens have sounded and Israelis have been told they have between 15 seconds and 1 minute to run to shelter and avoid rockets coming in, launched by Hamas in this escalation of violence that many fear could easily become the next war fought in that region of constant troubles. Video came into us tonight showing a wedding in Israel interrupted by sirens. When they sound, people scatter as they're told to as incoming rockets trigger outgoing Israeli missiles meant to destroy them in midair. Tonight there are missile launches and airstrikes underway. Israel has called up many reservists. This is a major escalation.
Make no mistake, this is a very serious escalation, which history tells us will have significant consequences.
I'm Jake Morphonios. This is the End Times News Report. From 2001 until 2004, I was a staunch supporter of the State of Israel. I empathized with the plight of the Palestinian people, but I sided fairly consistently with Israel over the Palestinians at that time. I sided with Israel over the Palestinians primarily because of my vehement disagreement with the tactics of suicide bombing and the targeting of civilians by Hamas, and the deep political corruption of Yasser Arafat's Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO. My defense of Israel played out primarily in my online political debate forum. With thousands of members, my debate group was very fast-paced. I personally posted hundreds upon hundreds of well-reasoned arguments in favor of Israel's right of self-defense. I studied the speeches of Israeli leaders like Shimon Peres, Ariel Sharon, and Benjamin Netanyahu. I received formal training in debate when I was younger, and that training included the principle that to defeat your opponent, you must study your opponent and their positions. Basically, I took the teaching of Sun Tzu's Art of War and applied them to the battlefield of geopolitical debate. Many of the tactics in the Art of War center around learning all that you can about your enemy. And so as time went on, and I learned more about the enemy, namely Arafat, the PLO, Hamas, and even Iran's Hezbollah, I began to realize that the Palestinians had a very strong case against the State of Israel. In time, my personal feelings on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict evolved. And as with all things Middle Eastern, the subject of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict just became a big, confusing mess for me to sort out. It really started with an eye-opening message that I got from an Israeli mother who had lost a daughter in a suicide bombing attack that took place at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem on July 31st, 2002. A Hamas suicide bomber had entered the university cafeteria. He killed himself along with 9 other students and injured more than 100 people. Because some of the deceased that there at the Hebrew University were American citizens, here in America, I started a petition to then President George W. Bush to take action against Hamas. This petition that I created gained tens of thousands of signatures, and along its journey, the petition attracted the attention of this Israeli mother that I mentioned just a minute ago. My email address was on the petition. That's how she found me. She contacted me to express her gratitude that I was taking an interest in what was going on in Israel. I asked her what more that I could do to help. Her response really opened my eyes. She said that rather than asking America to do more, she hoped that we would just get out of the way and let their own leaders take the gloves off, so to speak, and act without having to have permission from the U.S. president. Now, that really made me think about the role that the U.S. was playing in Israel and vice versa. While I was extremely well versed in Israeli politics and history at the time, I started trying to see the entire situation from new vantage points, new perspectives, and including from the perspective of the Palestinians themselves. And that's when I started seeing Israel in this new light. That's when I began to realize just how evil the government of Israel really is. So I began to see that, like the U.S. government, the government of Israel was a bully, and not just your average bully, but a savage thug, not the innocent little country that just wants terrorists to leave us alone, as the pro-Israel media likes to portray it. Now, I'm not going to get into why I think that Israel is more wrong than it is right in this ongoing conflict with the Palestinians. Really, I find both sides of the conflict to be displaying atrocious behaviors. I don't see how anyone can really cheer for one side or the other, but that's a subject for another video. I say all this as a preface to the remarks that I'm about to make. I want you to understand that I have many years' experience in studying, discussing, and debating issues related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What I say, I do so only after considerable investigation and contemplation on these various matters. By vocation, I worked as an investigator for several years. I was pretty good at it. One principle that helped me find success as an investigator was in putting the truth ahead of my own personal opinions. I went where the facts led me, regardless of whether or not those facts conflicted with my existing ideas at the time. Such has been the evolution of my views on Israel. As I uncovered more and more evidence, my position changed. At this point, I am so familiar with the players and their strategies that I can usually predict what's going to happen next. On June 10th of this year, 2014, I publicly posted my prediction that within weeks, we would see the opening skirmishes of Israel's next war. I wrote that this war may seem small to some outsiders, but that the war itself would have significant long-term consequences for the region. At the time I made this prediction, Israel and the Palestinian Authority had been in a relative state of peace for years. But just 2 days after my prediction, on June the 12th, 3 Israeli teenagers disappeared. And I knew, intuitively, that this was the first in a series of strategic moves orchestrated by Israeli covert intelligence services. I told my wife that very day that these teenagers were going to be found brutally murdered, and that the state of Israel would use the deaths as pretext for a prolonged bombing campaign against the Palestinians. Not only did that prediction come to pass with exactness, but in the few weeks since hostilities erupted, the two sides have engaged continual rounds of missile attacks. There have been well over 100 civilians that have been killed, almost all of them Palestinians, which is typical. And the newspaper headlines around the world are screaming about the significance of this new conflict. Now, I'm going to take a few minutes to walk you through exactly what has happened since the kidnapping of the teenagers. While I'm going to offer a few controversial, and maybe to some even offensive opinions, I will make it clear to you when I'm offering opinion rather than presenting absolute fact. All right? By way of introduction, you need to understand that the use of false flag attacks are very common throughout the history of the modern state of Israel. Of course, they aren't alone. Many nations, including ours, use their secret intelligence services to pull off large-scale, sometimes catastrophic attacks against their own people in order to sway public opinion and to curry international favor. My strong opinion is that the kidnapping of the 3 Israeli teenagers was the work of Israel's own intelligence and counterterrorism organization, the Mossad. I think that Israel is prepping for a strike against Iran because Vladimir Putin has successfully deterred a U.S. attack on Iran by stopping our attempted war with Syria dead in its tracks. This happened the last quarter of 2013. Our own CIA was in the process of destabilizing the nation of Syria, and it still is. They're funding al-Qaeda and other mercenary forces against the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad. It is these al-Qaeda operatives who repeatedly launched chemical weapon attacks against Syrian civilians while trying to pin the crime on the government itself. And then we had Nobel Peace Prize winner Barack Obama. He was halfway to Syria when Russian President Vladimir Putin promised to defend Syria from the USA with nuclear weapons if necessary. Had we been able to get into a war with Syria to defend the people from the chemical weapons attacks of Bashar al-Assad, Iran would have had to attack America. They have a military pact with Syria. It's kind of like a NATO alliance that we have. If one of our member nations gets attacked, we're obligated to jump in and help them. And that's how Syria and Iran are. Once Iran attacked the U.S. in defense of Syria, the U.S. would have had the pretext needed to move on over and conquer Iran completely. As soon as that plan was scuttled last year, though, I published a prediction that we would have Israel do our dirty work for us. They would be the ones to launch the first strike against Iran rather than us. But Israel knows that it could face a significant reprisal from its neighbors. When Israel strikes Iran, as they're preparing to do right now, there will be an immediate retaliation from Syria, from Lebanon, from the Palestinian Authority, and of course from Iran itself. Before going after Iran, Israel first needed to test its own missile defense shield system called Iron Dome. The only way to really accomplish that is to go live, to respond to a small-scale missile attack, to give them time to test and possibly recalibrate the Iron Dome systems, right? The problem is that the second intifada is over. Intifada is the uprising, Palestinian uprising. The Palestinians are living in peace to the extent that they can with Israel. So they needed some encouragement, something to provoke the militant factions among the Palestinians, such as the military arm of, paramilitary arm of Hamas. Something to provoke them into attacking. What better way than to brazenly frame Hamas for a crime that they know they didn't commit and then wage a brutal campaign of terror against the Palestinian people? Israel knew that attacking the Palestinians would definitely result in a retaliatory barrage of missile launches against them. Very weak missiles. These are not even guided missiles. Really, all they needed was a spark, a false flag attack. Now, here are the confirmed facts. On June 12, 2014, 3 Israeli teenagers were kidnapped in the West Bank. The 3 teams were Naftali Frankel, Gilad Shaer, and Eyal Yifra. The Israel Defense Forces initiated something called Operation Brother's Keeper. Sounds good, right? In search of the 3 teenagers. And hundreds of Palestinians sympathetic to the Israelis, they voluntarily joined the search for the teens. Okay, so you don't have the Palestinians being one-sided on this. They were very willing to help out, and they did so, probably to the chagrin of the Israelis who didn't want their help. But as part of the operation, in the following 11 days, Israel arrested about 350 Palestinians, including nearly all of Hamas's West Bank leaders. 5 Palestinians were killed during the military operation. The fact that Israel's response was so dramatic has to tell you something. Imagine 3 U.S. teens going missing along the U.S.-Mexico border. Can you imagine Barack Obama, or even George W. Bush for that matter, invading Mexico, killing their citizens, and taking hundreds of civilians and all their local political leaders hostage, throwing them in jail? All of that with no concrete evidence of wrongdoing by any specific party. Think about it. Such heavy-handed action does not make sense if we are to believe the official story put out by the State of Israel. On June 15th, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed that the teens had been kidnapped by Hamas, which Hamas denied. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas maintained that as of June 22nd, there was no evidence that Hamas was behind the kidnapping. Hamas praised the kidnapping without claiming responsibility. Now, this might sound strange to people who aren't very familiar with Hamas, but I am familiar with them, and I know that they are very quick to take credit for their own operations. Hamas is a very brazen organization. My opinion is that Hamas is not responsible for these kidnappings. But that doesn't mean that the members of Hamas were not involved in some way. Here's what I mean. Whenever the CIA, the KGB, Mossad, any of these black ops groups, whenever they pull off an event, they always have a patsy. A patsy is someone who is somehow involved, but who doesn't know the true nature of the operation. Timothy McVeigh, for example, he was a patsy. McVeigh, who worked with the CIA previously, participated in the Oklahoma City bombing event, and he was the fall guy. Okay, as the government rushed to cover up the fact that multiple massive unexploded bombs were immediately found in the Murrah building. You can see the video footage. What they did was they simultaneously pushed the official line that McVeigh was a lunatic acting all on his own, while covering up, snuffing out media reports of the bombs and so forth. Lee Harvey Oswald, he was a patsy, the lone gunman who pulled off the assassination of President Kennedy without help from anyone else. See what I'm saying? On June 26th, the Israeli Security Agency, ISA, released the identities of 2 suspects in the kidnapping. Hamas militants named Marwan Kawasmeh and Ammar Abu Isa. Both Israeli and Palestinian authorities said that these 2 men have been missing since the night of the kidnapping, and Israel's security agency stated that both had engaged in terrorism, that they've been arrested, that they have served time in the past, and were considered suspects immediately after the kidnapping. My opinion is that just like the FBI recruited Ramzi Youssef to pull off the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, the first 9/11, I think that most likely Mossad recruited these militants from Hamas to frame them for the abductions, if they were even from Hamas. No evidence has suggested that yet. My guess is that Mossad killed the men and that we'll never hear from them again. Might find their bodies, but we're not going to see them alive. But back to the facts. On June 30th, the Israeli military found the bodies of the 3 missing teenagers in a field northwest of Hebron. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu blamed the Hamas organization for the killings and vowed a firm response. Now, there have been 4 different Islamic groups to come forward and claim to be responsible for the killings, but Hamas is not one of them. Their leadership maintained no foreknowledge or involvement in the events. Here is what we do know. Day 1. The 3 boys were reported to have been hitchhiking. The last time they were seen was around 10 p.m. on June 12th. At 10:25 p.m., one of the boys made a whispered phone call to the police to report the kidnapping. Police claim that they initially thought it was a prank. In the early morning hours, one of the boy's parents, though, called the police to report that the boy had not come home. The police then alerted the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF. The last known location of the cell phone could be tracked to Hebron. Okay. The police placed a gag order on the Israeli news service to keep the matter quiet, though. This bizarre action began to stoke rumors the following day, and soon the gag order was all over the news. Why? Shortly after talking to the IDF, would the police order the media to keep the kidnapping story a secret? It didn't make sense to the Israeli people. On June 13th, Palestinian security found a Hyundai, a car, with Israeli license plates. The car had been torched the previous night, just hours after the kidnappings. Also on June 13th, the original phone call made by the boys to the police was analyzed. Here's what they found on the recording. Not only did the call contain one of the boys reporting the kidnapping and a request for help, but the tape also included someone ordering the boys to put their heads down, followed by a volley of automatic weapons fire that was muffled by a silencer. Then someone moans, then there's complete silence, then the voice of one of the killers shouting the word 3. After this, another voice is heard, calling another party on a different cell phone to report that the deed was done, and finally the men began to sing. Now, when the police took the original call, they didn't think enough of it to notify anyone. How could the police have heard someone report a kidnapping, hear gunfire, and all those other things and not consider it suspicious? Is it possible that the police didn't actually hear any of those extra things reported by the IDF? We don't know. But from an investigator's point of view, something there doesn't add up. I investigated further myself. I found that the story about the police thinking it was a prank just wasn't true. Rather than ignore the phone call as they publicly claimed, the police actually immediately made 8 attempts to call the cell phone number back. I don't believe that they thought it was a prank. If they thought it was a prank, they wouldn't have put all that effort in. I believe that the evidence strongly suggests that they took the call very seriously and likely contacted the IDF in the very beginning. Now, later on the 13th, the burnt car was found in Hebron. It provided evidence of massive blood staining in the trunk. Notwithstanding this, the Israeli authorities still refuse to reveal the truth to the public. You're about to see why. You're about to see why the Israeli government did not want the public to know that these boys were dead, or that odds were they were dead. Despite the phone call, despite the gunfire, despite the burned out car and the bloodstains that at the very least confirmed massive trauma, if not death, the Israeli government maintained the story that all it knew was that the boys had been kidnapped. They wanted the public to believe that the odds of finding the boys alive justified a huge incursion into the Palestinian territories by Israeli defense forces. On June 14th, thousands of soldiers, along with security agents, police, special forces, they launched something called Operation Brother's Keeper. The Israelis found little resistance from the local populations because the Palestinian civilians are accustomed, unfortunately, to regular nightly raids into their homes by the IDF. Still, the IDF found it necessary to use rubber bullets and tear gas that first night of raiding. Between June 14th and 15th, the Israeli security forces arrested 80 Palestinians who they accused of being connected to the kidnapping. The sweep included a roundup of senior members of Hamas, former government leaders, clerics, even university professors, all located in the West Bank. In Hebron, Israeli forces fired a missile into the home of one family before storming in. The family members, including their small children, 3 of them, were injured by shrapnel from the missile. In the midst of these initial raids, Netanyahu stated that Israel knew for a fact that Hamas was responsible, but again refused to provide any evidence to the public to support his claim. Israel's defense minister even threatened to expand military operations into Gaza and Ramallah, areas that were not connected in any way with the kidnappings. The Israeli government also suggested that they would resume the much-condemned campaign of targeted killings of Palestinian leaders. Killings that don't include the presentation of evidence and guilt against the accused in court. This phrase, targeted killings, it's just a more polite way of saying political assassinations, something that Israel is very, very good at. We move into day 4. Overnight on June 16th, the IDF clashed with Palestinians in Jenin. where they ransacked government offices and confiscated computers. Again, actions unrelated to the kidnapping. The same day, more than 400 soldiers raided the Jalazon refugee camp near Ramallah, killing an innocent man with a gunshot blast to the chest. A dragnet rounded up 50 more people, bringing the total of Palestinians detained to 150. Netanyahu's actions have been aimed at driving a wedge between Fatah and Hamas in order to break up the reconciliation between the two who negotiated in April 2014, and also to discredit both Abbas and his government, which has been backed by Western countries. Palestinian Authority sources note that Hamas and the unity negotiations had undertaken to desist from attacks and bloodshed, and if its involvement were proven, it would be a breach of the agreement that would render the reconciliation null and void. A point repeated later in the week by the Palestinian foreign minister. You see, only a few days into this search for the teens, Israel has already demonstrated through their actions that the kidnappings were just pretexts for other actions. You know how Bush's Zionist neoconservative dream team, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, all the rest of those guys, they were itching to get into Iraq from the first day they got into office in the new administration. They were looking for a reason to invade Iraq, and the September 11th attacks gave them that justification. Never mind that Saddam Hussein and Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. Still, the public, raw from the terrorist attacks, did nothing to stop their government. And that's exactly what Israel is doing. They are manipulating their own people, going after government buildings all over Palestinian territories, seizing computers, arresting politicians. None of that has anything to do with finding the teenagers. The government of Israel has been using the kidnappings as an excuse to do all kinds of dirty things all over the areas controlled by the Palestinians. Day 5. Overnight, between the 16th and 17th, the Israeli governing authority in the West Bank raided several institutions linked to Hamas in the Hebron Governorate in search of documents on the suspicion that Hamas charities were money laundering fronts to finance terrorism. Okay, fine. Anything linked to Hamas was being targeted. That's what they were going after. The IDF shifted its attention north, though, deployed 1,000 soldiers for operations around Nablus. In particular, the Balata refugee camp and the village of Awarta were scoured in what a spokesman called cleaning house. This is from the Israelis. And they called Nablus the terror capital. And so they go around, they arrest another 41 Palestinians, among them the manager of the Hamas-run television channel Al-Aqsa TV, bringing the number of arrests to 200. Israeli soldiers confiscated a large cache of weapons. So you can see here that Obama isn't the only government, his administration isn't the only one that can disarm the civilian population. Also on the 16th, we learned that Israel was getting help from Egyptian intelligence services, not to look for the teens, but to dig up dirt on the government of the Palestinians. Day 6. Overnight on June 18th, Israel abducted 64 more Palestinians, bringing the known arrests to 240. Israel announced that in the previous 6-day period, they had searched 800 buildings, including radio and television stations. Operations had been conducted in Hebron, Jenin, Nablus, and over a dozen other Palestinian towns. And in the process, 300,000 Palestinians were left under curfew. 600,000 in the area had their movements restricted. Palestinian workers, for example, living in Hebron, just in Hebron alone, more than 20,000 were denied entrance into Israel, and thus their livelihoods have taken a hit, according to the Israeli government. Day 7. Overnight on June 19th, troops raided the Palestinian University Student Union searching for incriminating evidence. The IDF arrested 25 Palestinians in the West Bank and searched 200 homes. 9 more raids were launched against Hamas social service centers. Israel also outlawed activities of multiple charities, Muslim charities, of course, such as the British Muslim Charity, because some of their offices employed Hamas members. Remember, Hamas is a political party. Imagine if Obama's administration went after their political opponents. Oh, wait, it already has. Thank you, IRS. But by the end of June 19th, 49 Palestinians had been arrested, and reports began to come out that Israeli soldiers were looting the Palestinians during these raids. Okay? Week 2, we get into the week of June 20th through the 26th. On day 8 of this incursion, June 20th, the patience of the Palestinian people was beginning to wear thin. They had put up with abuses from the Israelis for a full week, even joining with them in trying to help them find the missing teenagers. But it quickly became apparent that the actions of the Israeli government against the Palestinians had nothing to do with finding those boys. Sporadic popular resistance began to emerge, and clashes ensued as more Palestinians were being killed or wounded by Israeli forces. Now, I'm not going to go over all of that, all of these clashes, but I'll mention one or two from June 20th, just so you can have an idea of what I mean when I say clash. While raiding a refugee camp near Jerusalem, Israeli soldiers in a jeep ran over 4 refugees, innocent civilians. In Kalandia, soldiers opened fire on crowds that confronted them, shooting one man in the head. And as Palestinians began throwing stones and firecrackers at soldiers during one of the Israeli raids, the soldiers responded with gunfire and killed a 15-year-old boy. At the Arab American University in Jenin, a 17-year-old student was shot in the head by the IDF. Well, the arrests continued, and by day's end, the total number of known abductions was up to 320. Over 1,000 Palestinian buildings had been damaged by Israel. In addition to that, over 750 homes, and that's not even including the hundreds of homes that were completely destroyed by Israeli Defense Forces. So on the 20th, the Palestinian government again came out demanding that Israel produce any evidence that Hamas was responsible for the kidnappings. One official said that Netanyahu cannot, and this is a quote, cannot keep blaming one side without showing evidence. You know, that's fair to me. That makes sense. That's reasonable. Show us the evidence. It reminds me of the Taliban demanding evidence of Osama bin Laden being behind 9/11. They said, you're not coming in here invading our country without showing us some evidence. America said they had the evidence, but would they share it? No. Is Israel sharing anything? Of course not. Really makes you wonder how much of this they really have evidence for and how much they're just making up. Well, the Palestinians said that this massive military sweep that was going on every single day, it was just unacceptable. 300 Palestinians had so far been taken in exchange for these 3 teenagers, these 3 Israeli teenagers. The IDF had killed several innocent Palestinians during these raids. Homes had been destroyed. This is a typical Israeli response. It is always heavy-handed, always brutal, and rather than teach the Palestinians a lesson, all it does is drive more of their citizens toward radicalism. Let me tell you, if a foreign power invaded America, raided my home by night, terrorized my family, and shot one of my sons, I would become a terrorist too. It's interesting how the purveyors of real terrorism, like the U.S. and Israeli governments, like to pin that label on their victims. Day 9. We move on to June 21st. Israeli forces concentrated their investigations on villages north of Hebron, killing one old man after they broke into his home without warning. Another 50 Palestinians were arrested, bringing the total up to around 370. Raids continued into hundreds of homes, with soldiers destroying furniture, confiscating people's private computers, and stealing pretty much whatever they chose for themselves. Reports of theft skyrocketed. Also on June 21st, Israeli troops assaulted a female reporter and shot 2 more Palestinian teenagers. Day 10. On June 22nd, Israeli troops shot and killed 2 more Palestinians and wounded a dozen more. Arrests continued, bringing the total up to 420. 5 more charity offices were raided. Israel also raided 2 more universities, stealing their flags, as if the flags had anything to do with these 3 kidnapped teenagers. They stole the computers. They took items from the law faculty. Later in the day, 27-year-old Ahmad Saeed Khalid, who is epileptic, he was shot in the back by an Israeli sniper for refusing to obey an order not to enter his local mosque for morning prayers. Another man was found dead, having been shot by an Israeli M16 in the stomach. Israel again refused to provide the Palestinian government with any proof of wrongdoing, so the Palestinians asked the UN Security Council to convene an emergency session to help bring an end to the Israeli war against their people. Day 11. On June 23rd, the IDF raided 80 more locations and arrested 37 more citizens. Day 12. On June 24th, 120 buildings were searched and 13 Palestinians were rounded up, bringing the total number of innocent civilians arrested to over 500. Now, here's a significant point. On June 24th, the IDF admitted that it had no substantial lead on the boys' whereabouts or their fate. After all the raiding, the hundreds of arrests, more than a dozen civilians killed, after all this, the IDF says it has not come one step closer to learning anything about the kidnapped boys than when they first started. In my opinion, the Israeli leadership was fully aware of the fate of the teenagers from the very beginning. But to admit such too soon would have to cut off the IDF operations. It'd have to cut them short. Wouldn't make sense to continue all these incursions if the public knew that the boys were already dead. Day 13. On June 25th, 17 more Palestinians were arrested, including Palestinian legislators. An 18-year-old boy was shot in the stomach by Israeli soldiers. Day 14. On June 26th, the Israeli Security Agency released the identities of 2 suspects in the kidnapping, a 33-year-old locksmith named Ammar Mohammed Abu Aisha and a 29-year-old barber named Marwan al-Kawasmeh. Both men were reported to have disappeared from their homes on the night of the kidnappings. Israel calls both of the men terrorists. Maybe they are. I don't know. Perhaps that's correct. It wouldn't surprise me. Back in November of 2005, the IDF killed Ammar's brother, and back in June of 2003, they killed Marwan's uncle. Again, killing a young man's family members is enough to inspire deep resentment and even acts of revenge. It is entirely possible, in my opinion, that they were approached by undercover operatives who recruited them for a kidnapping operation, not realizing the full extent of what was really going on. Kind of like what happened with the 2 brothers who were approached by the FBI before the Boston Marathon bombings. Also on the 26th, the IDF carried out nighttime raids in over 200 homes. 10 more Palestinians were arrested, including 2 children ages 13 and 14. 9 children were injured by tear gas and rubber bullets, and 1 man was shot in the foot. An old man in a refugee camp died of a heart attack when the IDF burst into the camp in the middle of the night with their guns and SWAT gear. So we now enter the 3rd week. Let's just jump ahead. You get the idea. We're going to jump ahead to day 18. Finally, on June 30th, a search team located the bodies of the 3 missing boys. They were found with their hands bound together out in an open field just north of Hebron. Somehow, with the thousands of people, including military and everyone else from the government, somehow they just could not find these 3 boys that apparently had just been laying there in an open field for 3 weeks. Took them 3 weeks to find the boys in an open field. I don't believe it. So just after midnight, the Israeli military blew up and destroyed the homes of the 2 suspects in the case. Now this is significant, as any investigator knows, or anybody who has even watched a crime drama on TV knows. You don't destroy the evidence. Why would Israel order the homes of these men that they say are the killers? Why would they order their homes to be blown up and burned down to the ground? Why not cordon them off? Post guards to protect the crime scene? This behavior by the IDF is very, very suspicious. Day 19, we move to July 1st. Following a funeral for the three boys, Israeli jets and helicopters struck 34 locations in the Gaza Strip in response to rockets being fired at Israel. A 19-year-old man was shot dead by the IDF in Jenin. They said he was carrying grenades. His family, though, who witnessed the event, said that he was carrying eggs home. Eggs for the pre-dawn meal that they were getting ready to eat during Ramadan. In a tragic turn, just hours after the three teenagers were buried, the three Israeli teenagers, a group of Israeli boys, teenage boys, went out and kidnapped a Palestinian boy. They tortured him and then burned him alive. Not surprisingly, the government of Israel is not labeling those murderers, these boys, as terrorists. You're only a terrorist if it's your people being killed, right? Of course, the violence and the raids are continuing to this day. A lot of Palestinian citizens are being attacked by Israeli police, Israeli citizens. There have been multiple attempts to kidnap Palestinian children. So many soldiers from the IDF have posted calls for revenge against Palestinians on their personal Facebook pages that the IDF has had to launch internal investigations to save face. Now, the international human rights organization called Euromid, which is based in Geneva, Switzerland, they've crunched the numbers and released a report on the financial damages against the Palestinian people by the government of Israel just during this initial 3-week period. I'm going to read directly from their report. During the course of Israel's 3-week campaign of mass arrests in the West Bank, ostensibly to search for the killers of 3 settlers, the Israeli military and police conducted an average of 18 raids per day into Palestinian homes, charities, and businesses, stealing cash and property worth an estimated $3 million. If Israeli forces were really focused on finding the youth and their captors, why was so much personal property confiscated, usually without any type of receipt or written record to hold them accountable? And that was a question posed by Ihsan Adel, who is a legal officer at Euromid. And he goes on to say, in an area as impoverished as the West Bank, that amount of stolen cash and property is crippling to individuals' ability to stay in business or to support their families. This group, the Euromid organization, their investigation documented a theft of $370,000 in cash during the 387 incursions it examined, as well as $2.5 million worth of property stolen, including cars, computers, mobile phones, and jewelry. What does stealing jewelry have to do with finding 3 kidnapped Israelis? Are you starting to get a picture of what the Israeli Defense Forces are like? These are not good people. The money and property seized from homes, universities, health clinics, media companies, and currency exchanges. See, Euromid believes that even their own estimates are on the low end, since families and institutions have not been able to itemize all of their missing items. Many thefts have not even been reported. These are just things that have been reported formally. The Israeli seizure of money and property belonging to Palestinian civilians and civic organizations is a violation of Article 27 and 33 of the 4th Geneva Convention, which prohibit the pillage and reprisal against civilians and their belongings. So the group ends their report with this quote: governments and human rights organizations around the world must immediately call for an independent investigation of this pillage. The international community also must join with us in demanding that the Israeli government provide Palestinians with an official means for filing claims for return of their belongings or adequate reimbursement without delay. All right, let me summarize. We're going to wrap it up. On June 10th, I predicted that within weeks, a significant conflict was going to erupt in Israel that would turn into a war. 2 days later, a group of Israeli teenagers were kidnapped. In response, without presenting any evidence to the world to justify its actions, the State of Israel invaded Palestinian territories and for the last 3 weeks have been engaged in brutal tactics to subdue the entire population. The Israeli Defense Forces have arrested hundreds of Palestinians, including children and their political legislators. They have murdered scores of civilians. They have destroyed hundreds of homes. They have stolen millions of dollars in property. Military airstrikes are continuing and have already killed over 100 civilians, and now Israel is threatening a full-scale ground invasion. I don't believe that this operation was spontaneous. I believe that the State of Israel planned a covert operation, possibly in conjunction with a few naive Palestinian men who were set up as patsies, and that this false flag attack has been used as pretext for a massive invasion of the Palestinian government and the people. I believe that these actions are part of an overall strategy to help the United States of America get into a war with Iran. Why? So that we can plunder their natural resources and establish additional military bases to try to surround the Russians and deter them from initiating a collapse of the US dollar. And you thought geopolitical strategy was boring. Well, let me leave you with one last thought. Undoubtedly, someone is going to call me a Jew-hating conspiracy theorist. Yeah, sticks and stones. But I'm not alone in my theory. The families of the 2 suspected kidnappers are expressing the same doubts about the official story from the Israeli government. The father of one of the men said this to the Times of Israel newspaper. Here's the quote. "I'm sure that my son is being held by the Jews. He disappeared 2 weeks ago, but I'm sure this is staged by Israel. The security forces are staging it. They were in our home in Hebron on Saturday, June 14th, 2 days after he disappeared, and they ransacked the entire house. Since then, his wife and children have been staying with us because they are traumatized. We are sure the kidnapping issue is an Israeli show." Well, I'm interested in what you think about all this. This is a lot of heavy stuff, isn't it? A lot of crazy ideas, a lot of crazy activities, a lot of strong feelings on both sides. So sound off in the comments section below. I, of course, prefer that you keep it civil. Make some comments, challenge my ideas, challenge each other's ideas, or give me your support. Make sure to subscribe to this channel, www.youtube.com/prepare333. Until next time, I'm Jake Morphonios. This has been the End Times News Report. Dozens of people have been injured as Israeli forces attacked Palestinian protesters at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in East Jerusalem. This comes as violent clashes erupted in the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound after armed Israeli forces stormed the holy site to disperse Palestinians protesting the war on Gaza. Around 100 Israeli police officers stormed the Al-Aqsa's courtyards and assaulted worshippers, media outlets reported witnesses as saying, who also added that Israeli forces fired stun grenades and rubber bullets at Palestinian protesters. Sources say more than 40 protesters were injured during the unrest. Thousands of Palestinian worshippers were forced to perform Friday prayers outside the mosque compound because Israel had restricted access to Al-Aqsa. The Al-Aqsa Mosque has been the scene of clashes in recent months following frequent visits by Israeli settlers and officials to the holy site.
Israel is facing mounting pressure to rein in a spiraling wave of hate crimes by Israelis, mainly in the form of vandalism and graffiti targeting mosques and churches. This comes as Israeli authorities are systematically acting to change East Jerusalem's identity and character. A report published by the Al-Aqsa Foundation in October said the Israeli regime is planning to build a synagogue in the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound as part of its efforts to further Judaize the occupied Palestinian territories. Over the past decades, Israel has tried to change the demographic makeup of East Jerusalem by constructing illegal settlements, destroying historical sites, and expelling the local Palestinian population. Over 500,000 Israelis live in over 120 settlements built since the 1967 Israeli occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The international community considers the settlements as illegal. For continuing coverage of the crisis in the Middle East, subscribe to the End Times News Report. This is Jake Morphonios.
I'm Jake Morphonios. This is the End Times News Report. When George W. Bush came into power back in the year 2000, his administration consisted of several pro-Israel war hawks, including Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Pearl, other neoconservatives. Most of these men had served in previous presidential administrations. All of them had strong ties to the Israeli Zionist movement, and they had all helped to orchestrate other wars and atrocities in the Middle East. After September 11th, the Zionist-minded Bush administration started making the case that it was necessary to go to war with Iraq, even though Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. It was only later that the general public came to learn that these Zionists, most of them members of the Council on Foreign Relations, had been prepping war plans for Iraq from the day they came into power in 2000. I was among the small minority of dissidents who knew the facts and understand that the Iraq war had nothing to do with Arab terrorism and had everything to do with plans of the Zionist New World Order. The attacks of September 11th were used as justification to start the war with Iraq. After 9/11, the feelings of Americans were inflamed. I'm sure you remember. Our citizens wanted someone to pay. They wanted revenge. They were too emotional to stop and consider the fact that no evidence of wrongdoing on the part of Iraq existed, and yet they bought into the line that Cheney and Condoleezza Rice and the others were feeding us, that Saddam Hussein was a threat and we needed to go after him. So we went to war based on the lies of a specific group of men. And all of those men just happened to belong to a movement called Zionism. And if anyone dared to speak out against the U.S. march to war, they were called terrorist sympathizers. Trust me on this. I was personally targeted for my outspokenness against the war and was reported 3 different times to the FBI on suspicion of being a terrorist. Things were nasty back then. Of course, had anything become of those false reports, I'd probably be in Guantanamo Bay or more likely in some Israeli gulag to be waterboarded by Mossad agents, but things worked out in my favor. The Zionists framed the debate in such a way that opposing opinions were crushed, and it didn't help any of us that were in the anti-war effort that all of the mainstream media outlets were owned by Zionists. If you don't believe me, go to Google, type in "who controls the media." You'll learn that 96% of all the Western news outlets are owned by only 6 corporations: GE, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, CBS. And the CEO of every one of those corporations is a mega-rich Jewish Zionist who strongly supports Israel. So if your only information on the situation going on in Israel is coming from the mainstream Zionist media, then you're only getting one side of the story. This is not a theory, folks. So what is Zionism? You cannot understand what's going on in Israel today without understanding this fundamental concept of Zionism. I'm going to run through this quickly, and to do so, that means I'm going to have to broad brush the topic. I hate to do that. I hate to skip a lot of information that I'd normally present to back up and verify my statements, but I just don't have time to go through it. I could go on for hours about Zionism, but here's the basic history. In the late 1800s, a political movement called Zionism got going in Europe. Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism or the ancient House of Israel, as many Christians today seem to think. Supporting the state of Israel does not mean that you're supporting the House of Israel from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Zionism was actually created by non-Hebrew Jews, and even today many Zionists aren't even Jewish. You can look at Vice President Joe Biden, for example. He calls himself a proud Zionist. He's not Jewish. Today, most of the deeply religious Jews, you know, the Hasidic guys, the guys in the black hats, the black outfits, the curls, most of them are very strongly anti-Zionist. Go to YouTube again. Just type in anti-Zionist Jews and you'll see what I mean. Political Zionism is different from the religion, from Judaism. We don't have a problem with Jews. We don't have a problem with Judaism. We have a problem with Zionism. Keep that in perspective. Political Zionism is typically considered to be the brainchild of a German Jew named Theodor Herzl, but in truth, Zionism is synonymous with the name Rothschild. Remember that name. Who are the Rothschilds? They just happen to be the wealthiest family in human history. The name itself means red shield. Mayer Amschel Rothschild was a powerful banker in Germany in the 1800s who used the most low-down, dirty tactics conceivable to build and maintain the largest banking dynasty in the world, in all the world's history. Massive amount of wealth, massive amount of power comes along with that wealth. The Rothschilds used political Zionism to help establish this empire. They and their allies, all wicked men who craved power and control, pushed for World War I, and they got it. Now, Britain, after the war was over, Britain took the land of Palestine from the Ottoman Empire in the post-war spoils. Rothschild was in control of many of these British politicians and used them to get what's called the Balfour Declaration, which led to the land of Palestine being given to these men for control. This was happening at the same time in U.S. history that the Zionists were creating the Federal Reserve banking system to take over control of the U.S. financial system. If you ever hear somebody talking about the Federal Reserve, look it up, study it. It is crucial that you understand the Federal Reserve. But back to Zionism. In time, these same wicked men funded the rise of the Third Reich. What is the Third Reich? You know what it is. These men supported Hitler the entire time he was rising to power. Remember, Rothschild was German banker. So once these men had used Hitler, got him into power, got Hitler to start all these new wars, going to reclaim lands that they had lost, so on and so forth, going after Poland. Well, what they started doing is they used Hitler just like the Zionists today use U.S. presidents to start wars around the world that benefit them. Hitler never could have risen to power without the funding that these bankers provided to him. Yes, Hitler did a lot of bad things and killed many people. I'm sure he is rotting in hell right now as we speak. He killed many Jews, but he did it with the financing of Zionist bankers like the Rothschilds, the Warburgs, and so on. After World War II, these same Zionists did the same thing that the Rothschilds had done previously. They used their power and influence over key politicians in the British government to gain increasing control over the lands of Palestine. And if you don't believe that wealthy people, wealthy bankers, wealthy corporations control our politicians, I'm sorry, you are naive and you have no idea how things really work. So these men distorted and exaggerated the atrocities that had been committed by Hitler in order to curry favor from other world leaders so that they too would support the creation of this modern state of Israel, which was to be controlled by these powerful families. So they control Israel to this day, just like they control most of Europe and America. This is not a theory. There is solid, irrefutable evidence for all of this, but it takes considerable time to learn the history and put the pieces together. If you want to know more, search my video archives. That means that the only people who really understand the history are either those people who are directly involved in the Zionist movement, or those people like me and other conspiracy theorists who invest the time to study boring things like old political documents, war treaties, and all those things that most people would never take the time to sift through. Let's just be honest here. The average American knows almost nothing about the history of our own country. So it's not surprising that they have no idea about the history of Israel, how it was established, and all the dirty tricks that were used to set up Israel. Americans don't even pay attention to our own political process, and those who think they're paying attention couldn't explain their beliefs if they tried. Go ask an Obama supporter why they support Obama. You'll see a lot of this, blah, 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 you hope and change. Americans need their facts summed up in 15-second sound bites. They have neither the patience nor the interest in learning the truth, which is why the Zionists got away with taking us to war with Iraq. It's also why Israel got away with the 2008 Gaza war, in which they slaughtered 1,500 Palestinian civilians. All they have to do is say that they're fighting the terrorists, and the dumb sheep repeat the propaganda, just like you hear from Fox News and all the people that listen to Sean Hannity. The men who control Israel today are the same people who sit at the top of the global power pyramid scheme that's building what's called the New World Order. The plan of these Zionists is to create a one world bank and a one world government with themselves as its leaders. They've created a vast network to accomplish all of this. This network includes things like the Bilderberg Group, Google it, Council on Foreign Relations, the Carlyle Group, on and on. Look up the Bohemian Grove. Oh my gosh. All the stuff in the Bible about the one world government controlling the people is real. The Antichrist leader, the mark of the beast to buy or sell, the incredible end times wars, just substitute the actions of these New World Order Zionists into the phrases used by the Bible. And the Bible goes from being an ancient, mysterious book of prophecies and becomes just a straightforward commentary on modern geopolitical events. Interesting. Unfortunately, because most of the Zionists claim to be Jews, some are, some aren't, they can silence their opposition very easily by just calling everyone a Jew-hating anti-Semite. I guarantee you, if you go to, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, any message board where this issue is being discussed, I guarantee you, I would bet my last dollar that you will find half the people that are pro-Israel are going to be calling everyone else anti-Semitic. You hate Jews because you don't support Israel. It's a dirty tactic, but it works. So, what about me? My best friends growing up, I grew up in Miami, Florida. Lots of Jews in Florida. Most of my friends were Jews. When I got older, I dated Jews. Growing up, I went to Passover, Hanukkah, other Jewish celebrations so often. I had my own yarmulke, you know, the little hat that Jews wear. I'm not anti-Semitic. But if you search the comment sections, even on my own videos, you'll find that supporters of the Zionist movement call me anti-Semitic all the time. It just goes with the territory. Even today, someone was calling me anti-Semitic. It's an easy thing to do that dumb people who don't know any other way how to explain their positions, that's what they do. They just call you a Jew hater. A normal person doesn't like to be equated with Nazis and concentration camps, so they just keep their mouths shut when the Zionists start the name calling. I'm not bothered by the labels, so I just keep speaking the truth. If you are going to be talking about the Zionist movement, you need to be prepared for this as well. We could call Zionist anti-gentilic or anti-Arab, but that's not productive. I don't believe in getting down into the mud pit and wrestling with them. If someone is going to believe this stuff, they're going to believe it because they are open-minded. If someone's closed-minded, there's no chance. Now that I've given you this brief introduction, if you want to understand why Israel is attacking Gaza right now, then subscribe to my channel. I'll be putting out new videos tomorrow on this very subject. I'll give you a hint though. The Israeli attack on the Palestinians has absolutely nothing to do with the 3 kidnapped teenagers. Just like the American Zionists used 9/11 as justification for the Iraq war, so too are the Israelis using tragedies like the kidnapped teenagers as pretext to implement war activities that they had already planned to carry out. They just needed the event. So stick with me here on the End Times News Report. We're going to bust the schemes of these evil Zionists wide open and spill them out in front of everyone for the world to see. Please share this video with your social networks. Thank you for watching. I'm Jake Morphonios. I spoke to him, and he said that he saw the camps and the coffins with his own eyes.
We go live to End Times news correspondent.
Now, you guys know I'm not going to let them get away with that.
Dude, I saw this thing up in the sky, and I don't know what it was. It was just hovering there, and then it was gone.
Yeah, I traded words with Senator McCain. He didn't seem to like being called out on his escapades at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. Comet Ison isn't just a comet. It's a harbinger, a herald of things that are coming.
Witnesses described the sound coming out of the sky.
Building was shaking, the fluorescent lights were falling on the people. What is it going to take for Americans to wake up and realize that their government is preparing for martial law?
This is the End Times News Report.
I'm Jake Morphonios with the End Times News Report. In Part 1, I provided a brief summary, a history of the Zionist movement and how a cabal of extremely rich and powerful men used Zionism to obtain the land of Palestine for their own purposes. In today's videos, I'm going to talk about Israel's next most recent war against the Palestinian people. That was the 2008-2009 Gaza war. On Saturday, December 27, 2008, a U.S.-Israeli attack on helpless Palestinians was launched. I say U.S.-Israeli attack because the weapons used by Israel were sold to them by the United States, and the U.S. gave Israel the green light to wage war on the Palestinians in Gaza. The attack had been meticulously planned for over 6 months, an admission that came out in the Israeli press. The planning stage included 2 parts. First, the military preparation, and then the preparation of the propaganda. Israel had learned some very important lessons after its 2006 invasion of their northern neighbor, Lebanon. That operation had been pretty poorly planned and badly promoted to the world. One of the things that Israel did differently back in the 2008 Gaza war was to choose the best strategic time to attack. It happened just after noon, the very time that Palestinian children in Gaza City were returning home from school. The streets were bustling with activity. They were packed. Taking advantage of this high-traffic time period, Israel was able to kill over 200 Palestinians and wound 700 more in just a few minutes. Only took a couple minutes of assault. Now, what do you supporters of Israel think of that? The IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, launched its attack on Gaza at a time when thousands of Palestinians were essentially trapped in the busy streets with nowhere to flee from the bombs. These were innocent, defenseless civilians, and Israel butchered them without any remorse. In fact, this attack coincided with the closing ceremony of a Palestinian police academy that there in Gaza City. So the attack also killed dozens of police. This planned attack by the IDF was known to the International Law Division of the IDF itself. And this law division of the IDF criticized this plan for months in advance before the attacks were actually carried out. But the military brass just ignored the criticism because they knew that there would be mass casualties, which is exactly what they were aiming for. Here's how the law division of the IDF explained their rationale for attacking non-combatant women and children. Listen to this, direct quote. The people who go into a house do not have to be taken into account in terms of injury to civilians because they are voluntary human shields. From the legal point of view, we do not have to show consideration for them. In the case of people who return to their home in order to protect it, they are taking part in the fighting. Do you understand what's being said here? Israel's official position is that civilians who return to their homes are actually participating in combat, which makes all of the people justifiable military targets. Are you kidding me? And you people who are pro-Israel, you support this? You should be ashamed. A New York Times reporter named Ethan Bronner explained how this first day's assault back in 2008 fit into Israel's plan. He wrote that the massive use of unrestrained terror against the people, which was a common tactic the IDF began using as far back as the 1950s. He wrote that it was designed to inflict so much pain on the people that they would just turn against their own government in anger. But just as the use of torture on suspects rarely leads to any useful information, this tactic of massacring the people rarely turns them against their own government. It hardens them against their oppressors. Israel has no conscience when it comes to war. They behave with absolute hypocrisy. For example, Israel launched its assault on the Jewish Sabbath day. But 2 weeks later, when the death toll was already up to between 1,000 and 1,100 people, the United Nations tried to deliver food and medicine to these people in Gaza. But Israel's military blockaded the shipments, saying that the shipments would profane their Sabbath day. Incredible. Israel didn't mind murdering innocent people on the Sabbath, but they're not going to allow assistance to anybody on the Sabbath. Come on, you don't want to break the Sabbath to help people. It reminds me of the story of the murder of Jesus of Nazareth. The Jewish politicians crucified Jesus just hours before their Sabbath started. But Jesus' followers were not allowed to give him a proper burial afterward because it would have constituted a breach of the Sabbath, and the followers could potentially have been killed by these politicians as well. So it was the day after the Sabbath that the women were allowed to return to Jesus' tomb to prepare his body for proper burial. And if you'll indulge me for just one more moment while I'm on this topic, I found the remarks of the Israeli parliament member, what was her name, Shaked, to be very striking. She's this politician who openly called for the deaths of all Palestinian mothers so that these women can't give birth to more little snakes. In her comments, Shaked said that, here's a quote, she said, "Let their blood be on our hands." When I read those words, my mind instantly recalled the story in the Bible where the Roman governor Pilate told the Jewish leaders that he saw no fault with Jesus. He didn't want to shed the blood of an innocent man. He didn't want the blood of Jesus on his hands. Remember what the religious politicians said in response, the Pharisees, Sadducees, the temple priests? They said, "Let his blood be upon us and our children." It's astounding that 2,000 years later, the leadership of Israel is still committing the same atrocities against innocent people. Is it any wonder that so many people around the world want to see the utter destruction of the state of Israel? It's not like the IDF's hypocritical dual use of the Sabbath was new. Back in June of 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon, and they opened their war kind of the same way. They started on the Sabbath day with a massive bombing of civilian refugee camps and hospitals. They actually targeted hospitals. In one hospital alone, over 200 people died. By the time that Israel was done with Lebanon and Beirut, they had slaughtered nearly 20,000 people. This is history. You can look it up for yourself. I am not making this up. How could they get away with all that in 1982? Well, the same way that they got away with the massacres of Palestinians in 2008, the same way that they're getting away with it again in 2014. They have the support and the protection of the greatest power on earth, the United States of America. Why does the USA protect Israel? Go back and watch part 1 of my video series. Zionists control both Israel and the USA. Israel, in fact, is so sheltered by America that they can come right out and admit their atrocities openly without fear of international reprisal. America will jump in and help them out, save them. One prominent Israeli military analyst, a guy named Zeev Schiff, he admitted, quote, "The Israeli army has always struck civilian populations purposefully and consciously. The army has never distinguished civilian from military targets, but purposely attacked civilian targets." The targeting of civilians, especially children, is done on purpose. You wonder why you see the news, you watch the news and probably not mainstream American media news, but you look at other news sources and you see the photos of children lined up, body after body after body. This is not by accident. Israel is targeting civilians, especially children. Again, because Israel believes that if they create enough carnage, the remaining people will turn against their own government. In the case of Gaza today, that would be Hamas. But the intentional targeting of civilians is morally reprehensible. It's state-level terrorism. So when I call the state of Israel a terrorist nation, I'm not just using hyperbole. Here's the definition of the word terrorism in Webster's dictionary. Quote, "The use of violent acts to frighten the people in an area as a way of trying to achieve a political goal." Isn't that exactly what Israel's doing right now? Well, I'm not going to be hypocritical myself and excuse Hamas from its own use of terrorism against Israel. The shooting of unguided missiles into Israeli civilian populations, even though the missiles hardly ever kill anyone, is a form of terrorism, as is the use of suicide bombings against the civilian population, and I strongly hope that Hamas does not return to that. Yes, I understand that Palestinians are being unfairly and unjustly destroyed. They are being annihilated by Israel. But I still feel that even in the face of death, God does not want us to respond to terrorism with our own acts of barbarity against other civilians. I just don't agree with it. In fact, I used to be outspoken against Hamas, mostly because I was only familiar with the paramilitary wing of Hamas. But that isn't all that Hamas is. Like others familiar with the issue, a guy named Fawaz, I don't know how you pronounce his last name, Gergis, I don't know, Gergis. He's a Middle East specialist. He wrote that, quote, "What Israeli officials and their American allies do not appreciate is that Hamas is not merely an armed militia, but a social movement with a large popular base that is deeply entrenched in society. Hence, when they carry out their plans to destroy Hamas's social wing, they're aiming to destroy Palestinian society." End quote. Now imagine if America was conquered by a foreign power, for example. Let's say, I don't know, let's say Switzerland comes over here and conquers America. Our people would look to whatever source we could find that might save us. Maybe we'd even accept some ultra-conservative political party with its own right-wing militia as our leaders if we thought they could save us from our oppressors. You know, it's not like the fish-wimp gun-grabbing liberals would ever have the strength to rise up and defend us from foreign invaders. You know, you really think Obama's going to protect us from anyone? Those of us who are not living under the brutal repression of the Israeli government, we are not in any position to decide what form of political leadership the Palestinians should choose for themselves. That's their choice. We should leave it to them. You certainly aren't going to destroy Hamas by massacring half the population. You're not going to destroy them by decapitating the leadership of Hamas. It's a foolish error in judgment. It's a poor strategy on the part of Israel. Even if Israel could kill every single leader of Hamas, a new generation is just going to rise up and take their place, and I guarantee you that the next group of leaders will be even more radical than the first. Hamas is a fact of life. The organization is not going away, no matter how many casualties the Israelis inflict. And remember, Hamas is largely the creation of Israel itself. Look up your history. Israel was at odds with Yasser Arafat. And Arafat's political group known as the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Israel's secret intelligence service, kind of our equivalent of the CIA, theirs called the Mossad, they wanted to undermine the PLO, so they helped to develop an opposition party. That party was Hamas. This is not a theory. Congressman Ron Paul here in the U.S. explained these facts in detail from the House floor back in 2009. And just like all of our own CIA operations that we take part in, or that we inflict on other nations to try and undermine their governments, Israel began to experience the consequences of their infiltration and manipulation of the political process. You see, what happened was, rather than just cause a problem between Hamas and the PLO, Hamas grew in power. They became the major party in Gaza. In fact, Hamas is more powerful than the PLO. So what is Israel doing now? They're just repeating that same failed strategy. You see, the major governing party if you've got Israel here, you've got the West Bank, their political party is Fatah. If you look down at the little strip, Gaza Strip, that governing party is Hamas. But recently, even though these two parties have been at odds, Israel was really trying to stoke enmity between Fatah and Hamas. Well, these two political factions have reconciled many of their differences for the greater good. It's kind of like after 9/11, here in America, the Democrats and Republicans set aside their animosities with each other and they joined together against a common enemy. Israel does not want to see cooperation between Hamas and Fatah, which is one of the main purposes of the current Israeli invasion of Gaza. They want to further radicalize Hamas in Gaza to cause so much unspeakable anguish and anger that reconciliation between Hamas and the much softer approach of Fatah is not possible. It's a strategy of divide and conquer. Just like the USA goes around the world toppling governments, installing puppets so that we can control those nations, Israel is trying to control the governing bodies of the Palestinians by wiping out their leaders over and over until they get the ones that Israel has greater control over. We see this all over the world right now in the Middle East. Egypt's government, for example, you get one in, get rid of them, get another government in, they're gone, put another government in, over and over and over. Well, before I get off on that tangent, let me summarize the 2008 Gaza war so that we can go ahead and move on into the current conflict. As I said, December 27th, 2008, Israel launched an attack. They called it Operation Cast Lead. It was a 22-day military campaign against the Palestinians in Gaza. More than 700 Palestinians were killed compared to 3 Israeli civilians that were killed. But when you include all of the Palestinians who actually took up arms to fight Israel, the death toll reaches around 1,500. Laws of war violations by Israeli forces included things like drone-launched missile attacks that killed about 30 civilians, and they also killed 11 civilians who were holding white flags. You don't kill people that are holding white flags. They also used chemical weapons against the Palestinians. They used white phosphorus in densely populated areas. On Hamas's side, as I said earlier, Hamas and other Palestinian groups were firing rockets indiscriminately into civilian areas of Israel. Well, after the war, Israel severely restricted Palestinians from being able to rebuild themselves. They stopped them from being able to import essential basic goods and supplies to repair their homes, rebuild their schools and the roads that Israel had destroyed. To date, Israel has not held anyone in the government or the military responsible for any crimes against the Palestinians, despite widespread international condemnation of Israel's tactics. Now, in my next video, I'm going to jump back into the current conflict going on in Gaza. I'm praying that Israel is not going to repeat what it did in 2008. In part 3, we're going to talk about the current conflict in Gaza. 300 Palestinians have already been butchered. Many of them are small children. If history is an indicator of what is to come, this is only the beginning. Israel has gotten away with past atrocities and probably thinks it can get away with everything again. But there's something happening that Israel did not foresee. A power is rising in the north that may very well come to the aid of the Palestinian people. This could blow this conflict wide open. These are frightening days. These are days of wars and rumors of wars. Subscribe to the End Times News Report at www.youtube.com/prepare333 for continuing coverage of the crisis in the Middle East. Please share this video with your social networks. Let's get the word out. Thank you for watching. I'm Jake Morphonios. What you are looking at is a photo of a young Palestinian boy who was taken prisoner by the Israeli Defense Forces. They put the boy on the hood of their military vehicle and tied him to it so he couldn't get away. Other Palestinian boys tried to come to his rescue, but having no weapons, they used the only things they had: rocks from the ground and rubble from the Palestinian homes that Israel had demolished. But later, as men showed up to try and help the boy, the Israeli soldiers hid behind the boy and began shooting at the Palestinians with their assault rifles. Take a good look. Today we're going to debunk one of Israel's main accusations against the Palestinian people, namely that Palestinians use children as human shields. If you're ready for the truth, then stay tuned for more. I want you to remember this photo. There are many more just like it. I post this photo at the outset of this video so that all the world can see the truth. Israel uses Palestinian children as human shields. You cannot deny what your eyes are seeing. Well, I take that back. Pro-Israeli supporters are actually very quick to deny any wrongdoing on the part of the IDF or the State of Israel, no matter how much evidence there is to support the claim. So let me back up the truth of Israel's use of human shields with some additional facts. It's high time that we put an end to the Israeli propaganda against the Palestinian people and expose Israel's evil to the entire world. This is not the first time Israel has used children as human shields. Last year, the United Nations investigated the evidence of Israel's crimes against children and published an official report. In their report, the United Nations accused Israel of ongoing mistreatment of Palestinian children in military and police custody. I'll share the key findings from the report, and you can visit the link in the video description to read it in full if you wish. The UN confirms that Israel frequently captures Palestinian children and uses them as human shields. The report also proves that many of the children face torture, solitary confinement, and threats of sexual assault while in Israeli custody. The Committee on the Rights of the Child reported that while children on both sides of the conflict have suffered from violence, it notes that Palestinians make up a shockingly disproportionate amount of the victims. The UN report also found that Israel's use of children as human shields and as informants against their own people is widespread. From the report, quote, Israel's soldiers have used Palestinian children to enter potentially dangerous buildings ahead of them and to stand in front of military vehicles in order to stop the throwing of stones against those vehicles. They also cite other examples of abuse of Palestinian children. For example, forcing a 9-year-old child at gunpoint to search bags that the IDF suspected might have contained explosives. This UN report came out just 3 months after another major report from UNICEF which concluded that Israel is guilty of, quote, systematic and institutionalized mistreatment of Palestinian children who are in custody. Systematic and institutionalized mistreatment means that the abuse of Palestinian children is a consistent, ongoing tactic that is consciously employed by Israel and its military. The UNICEF report directs its harshest accusations at the alleged torture and mistreatment of Palestinian children in Israeli military and police custody. Children detained in areas like Gaza and the West Bank, the report says, are, quote, systematically subject to the physical and verbal violence, humiliation, painful restraints, hooding of the head and face in sacks, threatened with death, threatened with physical violence, threatened with sexual assault against themselves or against members of their family, restricted access to toilet facilities, restricted from food and water. The report continues, the common experience of many children is being aggressively awakened in the middle of the night by many armed soldiers and being forcibly brought to an interrogation center, tied and blindfolded, sleep deprived, and in a state of extreme fear. The interrogation mixes intimidation, threats, and physical violence with the clear purpose of forcing the child to confess. End quote. Both reports note that Palestinian children are often accused of throwing stones at Israeli military vehicles and charge Israeli forces with sometimes subjecting young suspects to solitary confinement. Both reports allege that the children are sometimes coerced into confessions, often by signing forms written in Hebrew, a language that the report notes most Palestinian children don't even understand. Remember, these are children we are talking about. The worst thing they might have done is to have thrown rocks at professional soldiers. But the facts demonstrate that in the majority of cases, these children are taken from their homes at random during continual nighttime raids by the IDF into Palestinian territories. Now let's talk about the Palestinians and their use of children as human shields. First, the state of Israel is waging a massive propaganda war to try to cast Palestinians as terrorists who hide behind their own kids. If you want to know more about how the Zionists control 96% of all American media coverage of this conflict, check out my other videos. The Zionist-controlled media constantly distorts the facts or tells outright lies to deceive the public. Here's just one quick example. The headline from Fox News tells us that the Palestinians are firing rockets at Israel. That message is superimposed over a building that has been blown up. On the one hand, it's true. The Palestinians are firing rockets at Israel. They're so ineffective that they almost never strike any targets or kill anyone, and they certainly don't have the ability to level an entire building. In just the first 48 hours of this conflict, even though the Palestinians launched hundreds of their rockets, only one Israeli was killed. In contrast, during that same period, Israeli rockets killed 300 Palestinians, including 70 children. So, what are we looking at in this photo? What you see here is a Palestinian building that has been obliterated by Israeli rockets. Those people in the photo are Palestinians searching the rubble for dead victims. This blatant yellow journalism is constant. That's why a person will never learn the truth of what's going on by only watching pro-Israeli Western media. It is a constant cycle of lies, lies, and more lies. People need to wake up and stop watching Zionist media and instead look to independent news sources that don't have an agenda. But back to the issue of human shields. The fact that we know that Israel's use of children as human shields is a prolonged, systematic, and institutionalized practice should make all of their accusations against the Palestinians suspect. It's hard to take the word of someone holding a bloody axe as they accuse someone else of being an axe murderer. At the very least, Israel's finger pointing at the Palestinians is absolute hypocrisy. Part of Israel's propaganda campaign right now includes the spreading of a particular video that purports to show Palestinians shooting missiles from a rocket launcher while a group of children are huddled in the background. This video has been shown over and over and over. There's only one problem though. This video was shot over a year ago in Syria. There are no Palestinians in this video. This is what I mean by Israeli propaganda. Propaganda that is perpetuated by American media like Zionist-owned Fox News. So on to the Palestinians. Are they hiding in mosques? Yes. Are they firing rockets at Israel? Yes. Are some of their weapons kept inside buildings that are also full of civilians? Yes. But before you judge those actions, consider the reasons why they are doing what they are doing. Here in America, we have a range of political parties and political movements. We have the Democrats, the Republicans. We have the Independents, the Green Party, the Constitution Party, the Libertarian Party, the Reform Party, and even the Tea Party. No single party represents all of the people. Some parties are more extreme than others. Some people might consider the Tea Party to be more extreme or right-wing than all of the other parties. The Palestinians are much the same. They have several political factions. In the West Bank, the dominant party is Fatah. In Gaza, the dominant party is Hamas. Hamas is more extreme than some of the other parties, but not as extreme as others. People turn to different parties looking for help or salvation from the nightmarish conditions they live under. Just like only a portion of our population supports the Tea Party or the Green Party, only a portion of the Palestinian population supports Hamas. So if it isn't fair to accuse all Americans of being supportive of the Tea Party, then it isn't really reasonable to say that all Palestinians support Hamas. That is simply not true. Many Palestinians, in fact, strongly object to Hamas. Hamas has done an immense amount of good for the Palestinian people who live in abject poverty. Yes, Hamas sometimes uses militant tactics, even terrorist tactics. In fact, back in 2002, I personally circulated a formal petition against Hamas that gained over 60,000 signatures. Having said that, if I had to live under the same conditions as the Palestinians, odds are that I would be far more likely to turn to Hamas for help. Palestinians are not hiding behind their innocent. I used to say the same thing when I was strongly pro-Israel. Are they hiding their weapons in their mosques and other buildings? Yes. Well then, that means they don't care about their people, and they're using them as human shields. Now, this is where the conversation goes from fact to fiction. You need the rest of the information to understand that what they are doing is not what is being repeated over and over in the Zionist media. Keep your mind open as you consider the facts. Try to see this as if you were a Palestinian. Remember, all Palestinians are refugees. They don't have their own nation. They don't have an army, a navy, or an air force. So just remember, first of all, that these people are the equivalents of our Native Americans who were pushed out of their own lands by a superior military power, reduced down in size as the foreign power stole more and more land. Not because you want to give it up, but because you don't have the power to stop the aggressors. So here you are, a Palestinian mother or father, an average person trying to live your life under very difficult conditions. Even though this is the land of that belongs to you and your people, each night a foreign country invades your town and raids homes at random all throughout the night. Last week, the Israeli Defense Forces broke into your neighbor's home, and a man who lives 3 doors down from you was interrogated. They ransacked the place, zip-tied him face down on the floor in front of his family. His wife was huddled on the floor against the wall, clutching her scared and crying children. He was lucky. They didn't take him away as they do so many of the men. We don't know where they are taken to. Those that are released don't know where they've been because bags were placed over their heads during the transportation. They come back with black eyes, bloodied lips, marks on their backs from where they've been beaten. So here you are, wondering if you and your family might get raided one of these nights. You remember that you need to make sure and have a conversation with your family to tell your wife and your daughter what to do if you do get raided. You know that you need to tell your family, just submit, just be calm, be quiet, and submit to what they do to us. That's the easiest way. You tell yourself you can't believe life is so crazy that you even need to have that kind of conversation. But this is a fact of life for the average, honest, decent Palestinian family. The Palestinian people used to fill this land of Palestine, just like our Native Americans filled what is now the United States. The Israelis claim that God gave them the land, but consider the rest of the story. The Bible says that the land was given to the house of Israel and would only belong to them if they obeyed God's laws. They didn't obey God's laws. Throughout the Old Testament, the time period in which Israel was viewed with favor by God is actually very short. They rejected God and turned to idol worship and child sacrifice. A civil war broke out in Israel between two kingdoms. The northern kingdom, which retained the name Israel, was conquered by Assyria, and the people were carried off into captivity. They were scattered, and today they're known as the 10 Lost Tribes. The southern kingdom, which went by the name Judah, lasted another 100 years or so until their wickedness brought the wrath of the Babylonians down on them. They too were removed from the land. What God had given, God took away. After a period of time, a small portion of the Jews were allowed to return to Palestine. They rebuilt their civilization, but again became corrupt and wicked. By the time of Jesus, they were in complete apostasy. They killed Jesus, but not before he predicted that the sins of the Jews would bring about the total annihilation of their nation. Just 40 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, the Roman Empire descended on Israel and completely destroyed it. General Titus of the Roman Empire killed over 1 million Jews. For the next 2,000 years, the lands were inhabited by the Palestinian people, not by the Jews. In the late 1800s, some of the Jews began to return to Palestine. They lived in complete peace and harmony with the Palestinians. They literally lived next door to each other. So what changed? A political movement led by non-Hebrew Jews, meaning Jews in name only, not the descendants of the Jews in the Bible, they started a political movement called Zionism. You can watch my other videos for more information on what Zionism is. These political Zionists, such as the Rothschilds family and their banking dynasty, used their influence to gain control of the land of Palestine. They tried to push for the return of the Jews, but there was a problem. The Jews scattered around the world did not want to return to the land of Palestine. A little known fact is that the Zionists actually worked hand in hand with Adolf Hitler in the early years of the Third Reich. In 1939 and again in 1941, Hitler tried to get the British government, which controlled the land of Palestine at the time, to open the land up for the Jews to return to. Not only did the Jews not want to return, but the British government didn't want them in Palestine. You see, Before the creation of the modern state of Israel, the Jews had been almost completely absent from the land for thousands of years. They had no claim on that land. Just think what kind of chaos would exist in the world today if any people could say that God had given them a land that other people were living on and move into that land to claim it as their own, even though their own people had not lived there for thousands of years. It doesn't work that way. The Zionists who moved into the lands of Palestine were not like the Jews who were living there in peace. This was a new breed. They employed astoundingly brutal terrorist tactics, not just against the Palestinian people, but also against the Jews who were already living there. The Zionists even attacked the British soldiers who were there on a regular basis. There was great amount of terrorism going on from these Zionist Jews. In time, the British became weary of the fighting and gave in to the political pressures of the powerful Zionists, like the Rothschilds. Basically, Britain washed their hands of a mess that they had helped to create, but didn't want to deal with. It sounds kind of like the USA invading Iraq, turning the country into a land of terror through failed policies, and then leaving the country for the Iraqis to sort out for themselves through a civil war. The land of Palestine was stolen from the natives, just like the lands of North America were stolen from our native population. So what makes the USA different from Israel is that we were more successful in wiping out our enemies from the land. What Israel is doing right now is not a matter of simple self-defense. Are they being attacked? Well, sure they are, but they deserve to be attacked. They have stolen lands from people who were already living there, and they are continuing to wipe out the remnant of the Palestinians who are today living on small patches of land out of what used to be their homeland. Of course they are resisting further illegal Israeli settlements on their remaining land. It would be like the USA taking all the land from the Native Americans, except for small reservations that they're allowed to live on, and then trying to take even that little bit of land away from them too. Would you fault the Indians for fighting back? I hope not. So here we have the Palestinians with no nation of their own. They are abused beyond description. They live in a state of perpetual martial law. They tried and tried and tried to negotiate with Israel. Don't just disagree with me on this, look it up for yourself. It's all well documented and easily verifiable. Now fast forward to today. Israel has nuclear weapons, laser-guided missiles, a powerful army, navy, and air force. They have incredible power and the full financial backing of the United States. It is incorrect to think that the Palestinians are just fighting the Israelis. Why do you think that other Muslim nations don't rush to the aid of the Palestinians? Is it because they don't care about them? No. Why don't they come in with guns blazing and save the Palestinians, their brothers? It's because, like the Palestinians, the Arab world knows that to go to war with Israel is to go to war with the United States of America. It wouldn't just be David versus Goliath. It would be David versus Goliath and Goliath's much bigger, much more powerful brother. If the fight was fair, the Palestinians and their supporters could defeat Israel. But as long as the USA is propping up the government of Israel by sending them money to the tune of billions of dollars each year, and all the advanced weaponry that the USA gives to Israel, the Palestinians cannot hope to win, at least not on their own. America's support of Israel has made us the second most hated nation in the world, second only to Israel itself. But our Western media won't tell you that. Still, it's true. I have lived in other countries. I know what people think of us. We are seen as bullies, and the world would love to see America defeated. It won't be long before nations like Turkey and Russia start to get involved in the conflict. It reminds me of a movie I saw back in the early 80s called My Bodyguard. There's this high school kid who keeps getting bullied. Eventually, he hires a bodyguard, and the bullying stops. But then the bully goes and gets his own bodyguard. Once the two bodyguards are busy fighting each other, the boy has to go back and face the bully on his own again. In our situation, Israel is the bully, and the USA is Israel's bodyguard. But if the Palestinians get a bodyguard of their own, like Russia, then the entire power dynamic changes. It also leads to a massive world war. Does Hamas sometimes keep weapons among the civilian population? Well, yes. Where else are they going to put them? They have no military or military bases to store their weapons at. The people doing the fighting against Israel is not some army. The Palestinian fighters are people like you and me. People who have lost children to Israeli missiles. People who have watched their family terrorized by an occupying power and are willing to take up arms against the enemy. If you fear someone attacking your family, where would you keep your guns? In some building miles away, or in your own home? So, are some Palestinians keeping weapons in their homes? Yes. But so what? That's exactly what you would do if you were in the same situation. But when they keep their weapons in places like food shelters or mosques, they get attacked in the media as well. If they keep their weapons at home, they are terrorists. If they keep their weapons in public buildings, they are terrorists. Damned if they do, damned if they don't. No matter how they handle the situation, they are vilified by a media that completely ignores the more important question, which is, why do they need these weapons in the first place? Let's look at history. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon and killed over 20,000 people. In 2008, Israel invaded Gaza and killed around 1,500 Palestinian civilians. As of today's date, Israel has already killed over 500 civilians, and 70 of those are children. The only thing that occasionally holds the Israelis at bay is their fear of negative media attention. If the Palestinians hide their rockets and other weapons in a government building or an apartment building, Israel blows those buildings up without hesitation. If the weapons are stored in a place like a school or a mosque, Israel has to worry about how it would look in the eyes of the world if they blew those buildings up. It's an effective strategy. It slows Israel down, giving the Palestinians a fighting chance. But your response is probably the same that mine used to be. It is wrong for Hamas or any Palestinian group to put weapons in a place that increases the risk of civilian casualties, right? That makes sense. But this means that they are using human shields, if we look at it that way. But that is a false argument. It is propaganda. That argument is based on the assumption that putting weapons in a school or a mosque increases the chance of civilian casualties. That is utterly false. In a previous video, I proved beyond any doubt, using documents from Israel's own law division of the IDF, that it is the military policy of the IDF to specifically target civilian populations to cause maximum damage, in the hope that they can inflame the public to turn against their own government. If Israel is going to target children, no matter what, if they are going to strap Palestinian children to the hoods of their vehicles, if they are going to gun down children in the streets and blow them up as they play soccer on an open beach, then what does it matter if you keep the weapons in a school building? They're going to be killed no matter what. In this current conflict, just like all the previous conflicts, the death toll of children is roughly 1/3 of all the casualties caused by the Israeli Defense Forces. Israel, not the Palestinians, are bringing children into the war, whether those children want to be in it or not. No matter what, children are going to be terrorized by Israel. This has pushed the Palestinian people to a point of absolute desperation. Many of the people are willing to embrace the ideology of groups like Hamas that basically say, Israel is killing our children no matter what. Nothing we can do can stop that. They are committing genocide against our people. We have to get the world's attention. If we keep weapons in a school, the IDF is less likely to just drop bombs on it. They will have to send in ground forces. We can't compete with their Air Force dropping bombs, but we do have a fighting chance if we can force them to put boots on the ground. This strategy works. No more children are killed than would have been killed regardless. In fact, putting weapons in schools reduces the casualty rate among kids. How? Israel has shown, and various international bodies have verified, that Israel will blow up an apartment building without hesitation, killing every last child in it. But they are less likely to strike a school because of how bad they would look in the media for doing so. The Palestinians have learned that Israel's Achilles heel is its obsession with positive media coverage and the continued ability to spin the story in a way that favors the state of Israel. Do you really believe that these parents in Palestine are so inhuman, so barbaric, that they would put their own children at risk unnecessarily? I tell you, that is simply not true. The Zionist media wants to portray Palestinians as wild, suicidal, insane terrorists who are consumed with bloodlust. That is not true. They are regular people, just like me, just like you, who happen to be living in a nightmare reality. What Israel is doing to them breeds extremism. If a foreign invader killed my children indiscriminately, you can bet that I would take up arms or rocks, whatever I could get my hands on, and fight those invaders in the streets, even if it meant I would almost certainly be killed in the process. Since when has it become fanatical to give one's life for freedom, to protect one's own family? Yet that is what Israel would have us to believe. In summary, it is a fact, verified over and over, that the state of Israel targets children, abuses them, and uses them as human shields. That alone destroys the one-sided media propaganda narrative that makes the Palestinians seem worse than the Israelis. If the Palestinians are monsters, then what does that make the Israelis, who have no excuse, no justification whatsoever for their use of children as shields? I say it makes them satanic, and the Bible backs me up on this. The modern state of Israel is called the synagogue of Satan in the book of Revelation. Here is the scripture, quote, I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before thy feet, and to know that I have loved thee. When Jesus was on the earth, he demonstrated his contempt for those who called themselves the people of God, but who practiced the works of Satan. And when the Messiah returns in the last days, we know from the book of Revelation, he will sweep away these pretenders who take the name of God in vain, call themselves God's holy people, all while committing horrible atrocities against their neighbors. I hope that this video clears up the myth that Israel pushes on you. You should feel insulted that Israel hypocritically hides its own actions while attacking the Palestinians. You should feel insulted that Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and all the other Zionist-controlled media outlets only present one side of the story, a side that hides the full truth, a side that is designed to fool you into believing that Israel is some innocent, benevolent nation that is just trying to defend itself from a bunch of terrorists. I'm not saying that Palestinians are all right and that Israel is all wrong. What I am saying is that Israel is committing genocide before our eyes right now, and we need to set aside our political differences, stop bickering with each other, and join hands in demanding that the genocide be brought to an end now. No ifs, no ands, no buts, and definitely no more excuses from the State of Israel. Don't let the opposition frame the debate with irrelevant questions. The issue here is not whether the Palestinians are bad for keeping weapons in this place or that place. That's a distraction. The real question must be, why is an extremely powerful nation waging war against a civilian population in the first place? The answer to that is that Israel wants all of the land that the Palestinians are living on. And when the Palestinians use the only tactics they can use, considering they have no military to fight for them, Israel uses that meager attempt at resistance to obliterate the population, to destroy their homes and buildings with laser-guided missiles, to demolish their towns with bulldozers, and then to begin building new Israeli settlements on top of the Palestinian lands that they just cleared. That is what this is all about. The completion of a Zionist plan that was laid 100 years ago to eliminate the native population of Palestinians off of lands that the Zionists have stolen. If you don't think that what was done to American Indians by the U.S. government was fair, then you cannot possibly side with Israel in this conflict. The State of Israel is a terrorist nation, and I call on all honest people everywhere to speak out against the atrocities they are committing. Israel claims they don't want to kill civilians, yet they keep doing it with great efficiency. Let's challenge them to stop making excuses about why they can't help killing Palestinian civilians and start handling the situation differently. And remember to keep asking the right questions. Asking the right questions will reveal truth that will have an impact on the way you think about things. If you see a man standing over a dead body while holding a knife, you may assume he's guilty of murder. But when you learn that he stabbed a robber who was holding a gun to the head of the man's child, then you go from seeing the man as a cold-blooded murderer to seeing him as a normal man who is defending his child. Israel does not want you to question their version of the facts, because they know that once the full truth gets out, the public understands what is really going on and they turn against Israel. This is why supporters of Israel are so quick to try to silence discussion by calling everyone anti-Semitic. Don't fall for the trap. Keep asking questions and you will be led to the truth. For continuing coverage of this conflict, please subscribe to my channel at www.youtube.com/prepare333. I'm taking a lot of fire from pro-Israeli supporters. My email accounts are being hit. My videos are being reported for abuse. And like many of you, I'm being accused of anti-Semitism. Like the Palestinians, this opposition, though, only increases my resolve. Help me get the word out. Please share any or all of my videos on this conflict with your social networks. Help bump my videos up in the search rankings by leaving comments below, even if all you type is one word: solidarity. Alone, we can do nothing, but together we can and we will make a difference. I'm Jake Morphonios, and this has been the End Times News Report. Thank you for watching.